Okay, get ready, folks, because today we are diving deep into a topic that's both ancient and surprisingly relevant even now. Sacrifices in the Hebrew Bible.
Hmm.
And we're not just, going to list off the rituals, but really get into that why behind the what. What did these sacrifices actually mean to the people, back then doing them? And what can they teach us about our own need for meaning, for connecting with something bigger?
Right, right. And it's fascinating because the Hebrew Bible doesn't just treat sacrifices as one size fits all. It's very categorized. It's very meticulously categorized. And one of the key distinctions that you'll see in the source material is whether the offering was eaten or not.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not just about what's on the altar, it's about who gets to belly up to the table.
Yeah.
That's a very intriguing detail. It feels like one of those keys that kind of unlocks a whole other level of understanding.
Exactly, precisely. That seemingly simple distinction actually reveals a lot about how the ancient Hebrews viewed their relationship with God. It's worth noting too that sacrifice was common in the ancient Near East.
Yeah.
But the Hebrew Bible, it outlines a system with some unique characteristics, I would say.
Okay, so let's dig into those categories then, starting with the sacrifices that were eaten. Why share a meal with God? What's the deeper significance there?
Well, I think in essence, these shared meals, they really get at this sense of communal connection with the divine.
Yeah.
Imagine a time when food was scarce and sharing a meal was a truly sacred act. It symbolized peace, gratitude, a binding relationship.
Right, it's like those traditions we still have today, like special meals with family and friends to mark an important occasion. It's about more than just the food. It's about strengthening those bonds.
Absolutely, exactly.
Yeah.
And within this category of eaten sacrifices, we find several distinct types. First, there's the sacrifice of peace, also known as the shalom or communion offering. Think of it as offering thanks to God for blessings and acknowledging His presence.
Okay. So how did that work? Was it like a big feast or?
In a way, yes.
Yes.
The animal was sacrificed and portions were allotted to God burned on the altar, to the priest, and of course to the person making the offering.
Okay.
So a true shared meal.
Like a divine potluck. Now we also have the sacrifice of Thanksgiving in this category. And that almost seems redundant at first, but the text that we're looking at here highlights a fascinating nuance.
Exactly. While the peace offering was about kind of general thankfulness,
Yeah.
the sacrifice of Thanksgiving was about expressing gratitude for specific blessings. So it wasn't just about acknowledging God's goodness in general. It was about recognizing His hand in specific events in your life.
It's like that feeling when something amazing happens to you and you just have this overwhelming urge to say thank you to the universe, to whoever's listening.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's an even more fascinating detail here. The source material really emphasizes that this entire offering had to be eaten on the same day. There's this sense of immediacy, of joy, like you couldn't wait to celebrate that blessing.
It's interesting how these rituals force you to experience gratitude in the moment. It wasn't just a mental exercise. It was about embodying that thankfulness right then and there. Okay, so we've got peace offerings, Thanksgiving. Are there any other types of sacrifices in this eaten category?
We also have sacrifices that were tied to vows and voluntary offerings. Think of these as expressions of personal piety and commitment.
So this is about individual acts of devotion, like promises made to God.
Exactly, yeah. It's a way for individuals to demonstrate their devotion, fulfill a promise, or even just offer a gift out of gratitude. And these acts really resonate with us even today, making vows, committing to acts of service, things like that.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if those modern practices are kind of echoes of these ancient rituals, a way of connecting to something bigger than ourselves that transcends time and culture. Did these offerings also follow that same structure of shared consumption? Were there specific instructions for how they were supposed to be eaten?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's a fascinating detail here too. Leftovers from these offerings, they could be eaten the next day, but no later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, after that they had to be destroyed.
There's that emphasis on timing again. It seems like the act of consumption, that shared meal with God, was really, really central to the meaning of these sacrifices. Now, there's one more type of sacrifice in this eaten category, the sacrifice of the covenant.
This one is significant. This was all about sealing agreements, like the famous covenant made at Mount Sinai. Imagine a whole community coming together, participating in this ritual that solidified their relationship with God.
And that connects directly to the Passover meal too, right?
Exactly. While not strictly a covenant sacrifice, the Passover meal shares those same themes of communal eating, remembrance, and celebrating God's protection. Each year, it served as this powerful reminder of the covenant and the relationship that it solidified.
These shared meals really do paint such a vivid picture of peace, gratitude, connection. But I imagine not all sacrifices were about feasting and celebrating. We have to talk about the other side of this coin, the sacrifices that were not eaten. There's a definite shift in tone here, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We're moving into the realm of purification, atonement, and dedication.
Yeah.
These offerings, they weren't meant to be shared. They were given entirely to God, often consumed by fire.
It's like we're talking about a completely different side of the human experience here. You know what I mean? It's not about feasting. It's not about celebrating. It's more, feels more introspective, more about seeking forgiveness or purification.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. These offerings were not about sharing a meal with God. They were about acknowledging the need for atonement, for cleansing, for coming to terms with, those actions that separated us from the divine.
So let's unpack those categories. Our source material mentions sin offerings, guilt offerings, and holocausts. Let's start with sin offerings. What was their primary purpose?
Well, imagine a world where even like unintentional missteps or ritual impurity or violations of sacred law, things like that could disrupt your relationship with God. Sin offerings were a way to kind of address those transgressions, to seek cleansing and reconciliation.
It's a powerful concept, this idea that, like, we can be cleansed, we can be made right. What's really striking to me here is that detail about the offering being burned outside the camp. That's such a powerful image.
It is, isn't it? And there's been a lot of, I think, scholarly debate, we could even say, about its meaning. Some scholars, they believe it symbolizes the removal of sin, like keeping that sacred space of the community separate from impurity.
Yeah. It makes me think about how we often try to like separate ourselves from the things that we're ashamed of, the things we want to push away, keep our own personal sacred spaces free from those things that taint us. Were the ancient Hebrews trying to do the same thing, but on a communal level?
It's a compelling interpretation, I think, and it really highlights how these ancient rituals, even the ones that seem so foreign to us now, they still resonate with very, very human experiences. Guilt, shame, the desire for a clean slate.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got sin offerings for those like unintentional missteps or impurities, but then we also have guilt offerings. Are those just another name for sin offerings? What's the distinction there?
They're definitely related, but there's a key difference. While sin offerings were about cleansing kind of general impurity, guilt offerings were about making amends for specific wrongdoings. So it's the difference between, seeking forgiveness for any wrong you may have committed and specifically atoning for a particular offense.
It's like the difference between saying like, I'm sorry, in a general sense, like that end of a prayer, and actually apologizing to someone that you've wronged, acknowledging the specific harm you've caused.
Exactly. And that level of specificity of really taking responsibility for your actions, it adds another layer of depth to our understanding of the ancient Hebrew relationship with atonement.
It's about taking ownership of your mistakes, seeking to make things right in a more focused and a more intentional way. It's not just about saying, oops, my bad. It's about actively trying to repair the damage.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then we have, I think, the most intense of these non-eaten sacrifices, the one that often evokes I think the strongest reaction for a lot of people.
Yeah.
The Holocaust.
The term itself just feels so heavy, so absolute. What was it about the Holocaust that set it apart?
Well, in the biblical context, Holocaust comes from the Hebrew word olah, which means that which ascends. And it refers to a burnt offering where the entire animal was consumed by fire on the altar.
Total surrender, total consumption. But what does that symbolize? What's the meaning behind this total offering?
Well, the Holocaust was really seen as the ultimate act of dedication, of surrendering something precious to God without expecting anything in return. It was an outward expression of complete and utter devotion, of really surrendering your will to a higher power.
It makes you wonder about the psychology behind it. Was it about proving devotion, or was it more about like surrendering to something greater than yourself, about acknowledging your own smallness in the face of the divine?
It's a question that's been pondered for centuries, and it's one we'll explore more deeply as we delve into how these ancient rituals evolved and transformed when early Christians encountered the teachings of Jesus.
That's a great transition, because it strikes me that we've been talking about these two categories, the eaten sacrifices and the non-eaten sacrifices, as if they're like completely separate. But we know they're not, don't we? They converge in a pretty remarkable way in the figure of Jesus, right?
Yeah, it's like we've been like exploring two sides of the same coin here. The communal meals, the peace offerings, like those all pointed towards this idea of connection, of gratitude. And then you have these non-eaten sacrifices, like the sin offerings, the Holocaust. Those are about atonement, about surrendering to something greater than ourselves. It's a fascinating dichotomy.
And it's a dichotomy that I think really finds its ultimate resolution in the person of Jesus. Remember how we were talking about those seemingly separate categories of sacrifice? What's remarkable is that they converge in this really powerful way in the New Testament.
Okay, now we're getting to the heart of it. I have to admit, when we started talking about ancient Hebrew rituals, I didn't quite see how we were going to end up here. So how does Jesus bridge this gap between like the eaten and the non-eaten, between communion and atonement?
Well, it's all about understanding how the early Christians, steeped in these Old Testament traditions, they